Hey guys, so the Yeswelder Mig 205DS and most of their machines really are not spool gun compatible, and we're gonna do our best to change that today. We're either gonna win or we're gonna blow my welder up. So what I did is I went out and bought a universal spool gun and some other little bits, and I'm gonna see if I can't make this thing work on the Yeswelder here. So this is what I got here, just a cheap little spool gun off of Amazon. There are cheaper ones, but I wanted one that the actual spool fits on. Some of them don't hold that. And if you look here, this is the type of end I went with, and I'll explain that here in a minute. They do sell these with the Euro connector, which is what the front of the machine has right there, but there's some disadvantages to doing it that way. So basically you've got 4 wires, 2 of them are 24 volt, and that powers the little drive wheels. The other 2 go for the trigger. Then you've got your argon gas line, and then this is the main power lead. So what I bought was some DINS 50 plugs so that we can plug the main power lead into this and into the front of the machine right there in that little middle port. So normally that would supply the whole MIG spool of wire through this lead, but you can pop that out of there and pop this in there. By the way, I'm going to link to all this stuff down in the description. It all came off of Amazon and it was relatively inexpensive. So this came with 2 males and 2 females. I really only need the 1 male plus the boots to cover them. This isn't totally necessary, but I got these weather pack connectors. I'm going to have to install a switch on the side of this, and this whole blue panel comes up off of there, and it's just going to be easier if we can quickly connect and disconnect them. So the other 2 things I'm going to need is a 4-pin socket. 2 of these will be for the trigger, 2 will be for the wire feed rolls. I wanted the male and the female. I was hoping that the female would match the one that it comes with, but it doesn't, so it's no big deal. We'll just wire this in, and then lastly, a switch. Now what you need is a 6-pin, 2-position. A 3-position will work also. You just don't need the center, which is off. Basically need these 2, and ideally, the way this works, the power comes in to the center pins, and when the switch is one way, it'll go this way, and when it's the other way, it'll go that way. So we're gonna tap into the 24 volt circuit that spins the built-in wire feed on the unit with these, and so this way we'll be able to tell it to just send it to the spool gun, and it'll shut the one that's built in off so it doesn't bird nest the wire up. So when I was researching this, I saw people do this to other welders, but I haven't seen anybody do it to this 205DS. And I honestly don't know if it's gonna work. I'm just gonna have to dig in and find out. So before we get too deep into this, I wanted to point out I did a super detailed review video on this welder. I will put a link down below and maybe up here to that video if you want to check it out. And also you can save 10% on any Yeswelder stuff if you use my code Flawedoffroad, and that's on helmets or welders, plasma cutters, pretty much anything that they sell in their store. All right, let's get on with it. Okay, here's the inside of the welder, and this shouldn't be so bad. These are our trigger wires, which go through that Euro plug. So we're going to tap into those in order to control the spool gun trigger. And then the whole wire spool gets turned by these drive rolls here, which if you look on this side, there's our motor. So we're going to take, not the motor side, but the supply side of this from the board and run it to the center of that switch. Run one side of the switch to this, the other side of the switch to the spool gun. Then we're going to find a nice little place to put our plugs and our switches, and that's about all there is to it, really. So this is also why I picked the 24 volt spool gun, is because this little drive motor here, you can see that does say DC 24 volts. Alright, now we've got some room to work here. So I want to figure out where I'm going to drill my holes for the switch and for that little plug. The reason I'm doing this early on is I don't want any of the wires or anything to interfere in here. So there's only a few spots that'll work, and it also helps me determine where to cut these leads, because if I'm going to be down here, I might only need to cut that much off. If I'm going to be way up top, I might want to cut them way up here so that everything will reach. So I think I want them roughly right in this area. That seems to be as good of a spot as any. Just put some reference marks on here. So I got this back on there roughly where it goes. So I'm gonna say about right there and right there. Everything clears. All right, so I've cut my leads from the motor. So this is obviously the source of the 24 DC. And now you could just put like spade terminals like this on here, but the idea is when you, like if you ever have to get in here and remove this, you want to be able to easily unplug it. And if I just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spade terminals, I'm not going to know like what they all go to right offhand. I mean, I will, but I won't. So that's why I want to use this style plug. So I made this one with purple to go to the switch, because this one's just closing a circuit. There really is no positive and negative. You just treat it as the same wire, and the switch is either opening or closing it. So this one, I'm gonna just put a male on here and a female on here, so that way if I ever want to like bypass this system, I can plug them back together, but they can still plug into this switch by putting a male and a female opposite on here, so they can plug like from there to here, from there to here, vice versa. I hope that makes sense. I'll draw it all out in a little bit. Okay, so here's that first connector. So I did a male female so I can just bypass this if I have a problem with it. So now I'm gonna pop this off of here and put the opposite ones on there that run to the switch. Honestly, I would have liked a better switch, more low profile, but this is just what I had on hand for 6 pins, so it's gonna have to work for now. So before I get too carried away here, I just slap these in there so we can check fitment and make sure that these aren't gonna stick out too far and all that. Seems to clear everything, and down there has even more room. Okay guys, I ended up having to cut this off of there, and I went to just female and male spades, and I use these kind that cover it up. And the reason I had to cut that off is this little nut and stuff that holds this guy on there wouldn't fit over that. And that was a little bit of foresight. I didn't put it on there first, so it is what it is. And now all I got left to do is connect those two to the trigger leads and connect these two to those last 2 pins on the switch. And so after I hooked those 4 wires up, the electrical part is pretty much done with this, and then we got to move on to adapting the DINS thing to that and the gas fitting. And so yeah, I think this is going to be a little easier than I thought. Well, fingers crossed anyway. I guess I made those a little too long, but I didn't want them to have a super sharp bend in them. So yeah, it's pretty much a matter of tapping those 2 purples into the switch now. I made these just long enough to where I can hook everything up, so I'm going to change gears now to the spool gun to get the ends put on it and everything. And once I get that figured out, then we'll go ahead and test everything with the cover still off, and that way if I have to change anything, like for example if the drive wheels spin the wrong way, then I can easily flip 2 of these wires. So if my math is right, with this up it should be powering this motor, and then the down position will be for the spool gun. We'll find out when we go to test it. Alright, so in order to figure these out, we got out the old junky meter here, and supposedly I was supposed to have red, black, and 2 whites. So the red and black were supposed to be the drive wheels, and the 2 whites were supposed to be the trigger. Yeah. And it turns out the trigger is black and yellow, and the drive wheel, so that leaves these 2 for the drive wheels, and I don't know which one's plus and minus, so we are just gonna have to experiment with it. Alright, so we got the new plug put on there because I just couldn't reuse that old one. I didn't have the female to it. Next, we're turning our attention to this lug. I'm gonna peel this copper lug off of here. And this isn't very thick gauge wire to be going in that big of a hole, so I'm gonna figure out something creative in order to crimp this lug on there. So I pretty much chopped the ends off of that because this was gonna be too small and I wanted to leave part of this copper in here. So I'm basically gonna slide this down on here and then put that in there and see if I can't get it to squeeze tight. If I can, great. If not, coming up with something else. I don't know if you can see in there. It's got it squished pretty good. I'm gonna go for another turn or two here and call it good. So this sucker has a couple nubs that slide up them tabs, and once you get it in there, it locks in there really good. I made the mistake of test fitting one of these, and it took me a while to get it pulled up out of there. All right, so there's that. Let's see how she fits into the welder. This will come over here into the side, and now we just got to worry about this gas line. Okay, guys, so now that everything's connected except for the gas, I just can't help myself. I got to test it out. So let's see what happens. So obviously we're missing the gas. I don't care about the ground. All of our connections are on. They're all good. So let's turn this on, and I think this is going to control this little motor over here first. The way I wired this, either trigger will work. Now, I don't have the MIG gun on here right now, but if I did, I could pull that trigger or this trigger, and the same function's going to happen. So we'll just be using the one on the spool gun. We're either going to win or we're going to blow my welder up. So. Okay, so I can see the little DC motor turning for those drive wheels. Let's flip the switch, see what happens. We're looking for spinning right in here. Oh, yes, it's just backwards, though. So I gotta flip the wires. I knew it was a 50-50 guess, but it's working. Okay, guys, I think I just had like unintended accident that actually turned out pretty cool. When I was looking this up and all the different spool guns, I thought that it had a dial on here for wire speed and that it would be a constant 24 volts and whatever. It doesn't. There's no dial on here whatsoever. This machine doesn't have wire speed for its feeder either. It varies the voltage that comes to this little motor right there. So I started playing with the amps, and it actually changes the wire speed on this too, which is awesome as long as it's in the right range. Aluminum burns a little different. 3.5 seconds. So hopefully it's not coming out too fast or too slow. If it does, I have a workaround for that. It's something I didn't want to do, and that's to use a variable voltage power supply that's external of the welder. So I just threw the lid back on, and you know, I made these a little longer than they need to be, so you do have to play a little bit of Tetris to kind of get everything in there where it's not pushing on anything, but it all fits, it all clears. And honestly, it's a fairly clean install. I would have liked a nicer switch that didn't stick out so far, but again, it's just what I had on hand. Okay, pardon my mess in here. So, to hook up the gas, this thing has this tube right here, which is basically 5/16 airline. So what I did was I got a push lock connector for 5/16, and I got about a 10-foot chunk of 5/16 airline. So that goes in there just like that. You just push it in and it locks in. So there's my gas connection. Now if you follow this, this is the important part. Getting that to connect to your argon regulator is a little bit of a pain. Now I bought this splitter, which you're not going to need. Before I just had my TIG torch going in right there. This thing has a weird fitting, and it's called AW17 and AW14. So what this is a barb and an AW, it's either 14 or 17 nut. I'll put it on the screen. It goes in there, but there's like it's almost like a hydraulic type fitting. It's like a taper. You don't need thread tape or anything. Since this wouldn't fit over that barb, I found a piece of 5/16 fuel hose, clamped it on there, and then this slid up inside of there, and it was a really tight fit. And I just lightly tightened this down, and it's not leaking. I'd like to do something a little better in the future, but this is going to allow me to test it. So the bad thing about this spool gun is it doesn't turn on the gas when you turn this on. It's open all the time. So I'm either going to have to put in like a push button gas on off valve right here, or I'm going to have to like basically turn this on, make my weld, and turn this off. So that's not ideal, but it will allow me to test this thing out and start playing with wire feed settings, because that's going to be the most important part of this whole thing is, will this thing push enough wire to actually properly weld? So before I fire this thing up, what we are going to do is go through the different settings, because we've got MIG CO2, we've got MAG, which is MIG argon, and we've got gasless. And they're all tuned a little bit different, and we're going to see which one of these three is going to push out the most wire for whatever given voltage that we're set at. After I do that, I'm going to do the same thing on the wire size selection, because this thing doesn't really need to know what size I have, but I'm hoping that if I put it on 023 that it's going to push a lot more wire. So I'm just going to start playing with these, and hopefully I'll be able to make a chart. Okay, so here's the results that I got, and now I couldn't set the same voltage on all of them because it just, every time you change the settings, it would change the voltage. So I just made the constant be the amperage. I just had it turned all the way up, but I had the volts on that -10 setting that this thing has, because that's kind of what I'm needing is more wire speed for the amount of volts. So I thought if I turned it down, I would just see what kind of numbers we would get. So this whole top row is 035. Flux would not let me set the machine on anything but 035, so for that setting, it was the winner. And what I did was I held the trigger for about 6 seconds, and then I measured it, and then if you times that by 10, that'll tell you about how many inches per minute will come out. So that would be apparently 85, 62, and 60. So the winner here was on the MIG CO2 setting on 023, 19 3/4 inches, which would be about 193 or so inch per minute. Now, if you look though, that was really up there on the voltage. So if I try to dial that back so that it's not too hot, this is probably going to slow down quite a bit. Some other close winners were 030 and 023 on the MAG setting, were 16 and 15 3/4. I don't understand how you would have thought the 023 would have been farther. Maybe I had some wire slippage, but I'm going to test a little bit more off camera just because it's not very fun to watch. So the hope is to just come up with something that resembles a chart so that I can weld. I'm not going to do a ton of aluminum welding in here anyway, maybe some between 1/8 and 1/4 inch material, maybe some thinner stuff now and then, but that'll just be tack welds. If I can make it work for that stuff, we will be happy. As soon as I open this, that thing's gonna start hissing gas. So here's something strange. No matter what I do with the amps on this, it's staying on 28.5 volts, and that's on that MIG CO2 023 setting. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to dial in the heat the way I want to, but we're just going to turn her back up to max and see what it does to some 1/4 inch. Okay, so that's burning back really bad. So we're going to have to figure out something else. Turn MAG 030. I need more wire speed, but I can literally just watch it burn the wire up before it even, like I can't even see wire. It's just straight up arc right off the tip. So right now we are on MAG 030, 205 amps. That's just to get the wire speed, but only 16.7 volts. What I'm doing right now is there's this plus and minus 10 volt setting on the 205 DS. I had it at 0 and it was like too much, and then I had it at 10 and it was what you just saw there. So we're gonna split the difference and see what we get here. Well, that welded. I don't know if I'm in love with it or not. We'll go to -4. Man, that was like really, really wetted out and liquidy. And it's actually starting to sink through right there. It seems a bit too hot still, so I'm actually gonna just try to dial these amps back. I'm gonna lose some wire speed, and I'm gonna lose some voltage too. We'll go down to 190 and 18.6. Keep in mind, these settings are designed for steel, not aluminum, so I'm just kind of taking what I get here. Okay, we're gonna try to make a little T-joint here. This is 1/8" wall tubing, so I tried to turn her down a little bit. I'm gonna see if this thing will allow me to get the puddle up onto here. I'm gonna try to focus more on here so that I don't blow a hole through that. And yes, this is an aluminum only brush. I don't really have any good new material, so I'm just gonna work with what we got here. And I've got the machine on 180 amps, 18.3 volts. Might be a little too hot still, we'll find out. That is not too shabby. Yeah, don't touch that, dummy. It never felt like it was too hot. Let me brush it clean and see what it looks like. I'm gonna try to do the other side now. I'm not sure what's going on here. I'm pulling the trigger and it's just moving for a second and then stopping. I might have melted away some of my tip already. Luckily this thing came with tin. Let's take this out and see what happens. So yeah, this thing wasn't spitting any wire out and I burned up the tip, and that might have been when I just had it too hot the first couple times. That's what I'm hoping. There we go. I was just having wire problems. This is that first one I did. Those were those first couple welds that didn't lay down. That was that one that was so hot it almost melted a hole right through it right there. Just about sunk through there at the end. Okay guys, there's another weld straight on the 1/8". As with always with aluminum, it always starts cold and then it starts heating up, and then you have to speed up because of the way that aluminum conducts heat. So that's why it's kind of like not even penetrated right at the start. I tried sitting still there hoping it would dig in, and then right about here you can see my pattern started getting a lot bit faster, and then I could see that it was getting ready to blow through, so I let off. Now I could have filled that crater, but so overall, I'm pretty happy with that. I'm gonna start writing down some numbers. I'm gonna put together all the little parts, pieces, part numbers, prices, everything. I'll put that on the screen for you guys. Pardon the loud ass fan here. These are the settings I was just using to get these welds, and this is 1/4 on the 8. And even on the 8, it started to melt through, so you could turn it down a little bit for 8. But I am on Mig Argon 030, 190 amps, 18.6 volts, but if you push this button 3 times to the volts, you'll see I'm on -4, which brings the volts down a little bit, and then I just had the inductance on 0. So that's kind of the baseline setting. So if you follow along and do this, those settings right there should get you in the ballpark where you can weld between 1/8 and 1/4. If you're gonna be doing thinner stuff, you're probably gonna have to dial that down, which as long as you set the other stuff up right, you should be able to just turn the amps down, the volts will kind of come down with it, and just find your own numbers, find out what works for you. I do not have any thin gauge on hand, so I really can't even test what's gonna work on those. 1/8" and 1/4 is all I have. I still have to figure out a way to turn on and off the gas right here. Now they make some little push button like air valves, and this is that same 5/16 air line that comes out the other end. So I'm hoping I can rig up a little push button valves right here so I can push it with these fingers while I'm pushing that. If not, at least if I can get a little 1/4 turn valve to put on here so I can just open it and close it, because right now I'm having to come over here and close this thing off. Other than that, I think that's about the last piece of the puzzle other than the settings. So this might have been easier to do with a Euro plug spool gun, like I said, but nothing beats being able to have the gas separate from the machine and like literally having to unplug one lead. All you have to do is unplug this, plug the spool gun in there, and flip a switch, and you're welding. And now let's say the next part you want to weld is steel. All you gotta do is flip this switch back up, plug this back in, and you're ready to go. Your gas is still hooked up, your wire's still hooked up. So it's like super quick change. And yeah, that was kind of the whole idea with this. I want to show you guys one more thing that's optional for hooking up your gas. What you can do is get an air coil similar to what you would have like in an air locker in a Jeep. And you can open this up and you can wire it basically in series with the one that already turns on the main welder gas that comes through here, so that when you pull the trigger, it will engage. And then you can put a secondary port on the back, connect that to your bottle, and then hook the lead from the spool gun like in here somehow and up to that air coil, and that would be kind of a more clean install. I might do that in the future, but I'm not going to do it right now. So I really hope that this helps some of you guys out that want a spool gun and don't want to buy a different welder. You can make it work on the 205DS. It is a little bit of work, it's a little bit frustrating, but this video should help you out. Thank you so much for watching. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and I'll see you next time.